This video contains episodes 67 and 68 of Alone in the Woods, one of my other podcasts where I narrate scary true stories that happened in the great outdoors. Enjoy. Help Alone in the Woods become a horror colossus by following and reviewing the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Deep within the woods, the rules and beliefs of our society begin to fade, replaced with whispers in the night, unseen predators, and things you were never meant to encounter. All of this and more is waiting just beyond the trees. Welcome back to Alone in the Woods. I'm Darkness Prevails, and tonight's episode brings you allegedly true stories of terror and survival from those who dared to venture into the unknown. If you've had your own unnerving encounter in the great outdoors, I want to hear it. Visit eeriecast.com/outdoor to share your story, and it could be featured in a future episode. And if these tales keep you coming back for more, consider leaving a rating or review on Apple or Spotify. Your feedback makes all the difference and helps us keep the fire burning. Now throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. Something in the Woods. From Anonymous. I live in Pennsylvania, in a quiet town where nothing really happens. The first time I heard it, I was with a friend up by the train tracks, about a mile away from my house. Just inside of the woods, on one side of the train tracks, were the townhouses, and on the other side, there were more woods. My friend and I were walking around the train tracks, and I said something stupid. She said, "Oh my God," kind of loud, and then we both heard someone from the other side of the train tracks, deeper in the woods, repeat what she said in her voice, but slightly off. We both looked at each other and decided to leave. I mostly forgot about that experience over time. About a year after that, a friend of a friend died in a car crash around October. I had trouble processing it at first, so I went for a walk to clear my head. I ended up at the train tracks. It was getting dark and I should have just left. I sat down to think about life and the future, and then I heard someone from the other side of the tracks call out my name in my dad's voice. I froze. My dad died 3 years prior to this. I wasn't in a good mindset at the time, and I found myself crossing the train tracks and walking into the woods, going deeper into them. I know it was a stupid move. I knew I shouldn't respond when someone calls out my name from the woods, but I couldn't stop myself. I had heard a lot about wendigos and skinwalkers, but I didn't care. I just kept walking. I was just out of sight from the train tracks, and the sun was setting quickly, and I heard it in my dad's voice say my name again. I was extremely overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. I called out, "Hello, Dad?" Again, stupid, I know. Then, in an emotionless voice, I heard him again say, "Yeah, come over here. I want to show you something." I just stood there for a minute, and I was realizing what a poorly thought-out position I'd put myself in, and how I let my curiosity get the best of me. Then I heard it again, but in more of a demanding tone. "Come over here." I was really scared, and my adrenaline was kicking in by this point, and I could smell whatever it was. The smell alone made me want to throw up. I didn't know what to do. I decided to turn around and started walking back to the train tracks, and then I heard something walking behind me. I didn't want to see what it was, so I started running. I heard the thing behind me start running as well. I was a couple of feet away from the tracks as a train was passing. I thought I was screwed, but for some reason, whoever or whatever was following me didn't pass the tree line. I think it was because of the loud train passing by. I stood fairly close to the train. I didn't really get a good look at it, and frankly, I didn't want to, but it was tall and on 2 legs, and it smelled terrible, like rotten eggs and a composting carcass mixed in horse manure. By the time the train passed, it was almost completely dark. I quickly crossed the train tracks and went straight back to my house. It all happened so fast, and my adrenaline rush made it seem like a blur. I was full of emotions and questions, and my mom was understandably upset because of how late I was out. I just told her there was a small car crash by the intersection, so I had to take a different route. I don't think she'd believe me if I told her what I saw. I just went straight to bed with my dog by my side, but I didn't sleep at all. I didn't go back there for a while, and when I did, I was with a couple of friends, and I didn't dare cross the train tracks. Even to this day, I haven't gone past them. Paw prints and eyeshine. From Grassland Geek. I have experienced 2 separate occasions where I have encountered something unexplainable. I don't know if they were connected to each other. What I do know is that whatever I saw was very similar. For some context, I am a person of faith, but I am a skeptic of the cryptid and paranormal. But after the second encounter, I have begun to realize that if heaven and angels exist, then things on earth that are unexplainable can too. Whether or not this thing was good or bad has yet to be determined, though. I'm from the Flint Hills of Kansas, a small portion of a seemingly flat state that is both extremely hilly and rocky, with grass sometimes reaching over 6 feet tall. It is so beautiful and peaceful, especially where I grew up. I was blessed to live on a small horse and cattle ranch. We run a small cow-to-calf program with commercial red and black Angus. Our horses were used to working cattle in the fall and show at horse shows in the spring and summer months. We also had chickens, dogs, cats, and, on the occasion, a duck or goose. Needless to say, my life was surrounded with animals. My parents often said that I was more comfortable around animals than people, which I would have to agree with. I always felt more connected with nature and creatures than with people who I tended to avoid. What I am getting at is, I've known animal behavior most my life. This all still baffles me, as it's nothing like the wildlife I've encountered. The first occurrence happened when I was about 16 years old. I had finished chores, and I decided to sleep outside, as it was often cooler than in the house. My parents liked to save energy by shutting the AC off in the cabin and letting the night air cool the house with open windows and screen doors. On those nights, I enjoyed laying on the hammock on the deck, listening to the wildlife, bugs and farm animals. For a while, things were as normal. The crickets were chirping, the great horned owls were hooting, and I could hear the quiet shuffle and muffled nickers of horses or the occasional low of a mother cow to her calf in the dry lot. One thing I distinctly remember was the coyotes. We lived in a fairly remote place, so the packs were very common to yip and call all night. If you listen for long enough and over time, you start to learn where each group resides and when they're going to call to each other. The northern pack gave their call out, as they always did first. I listened for the western pack to sound off next, as that was what normally happened. But they never called. In fact, nothing responded back for a few minutes, and it made me sit up in my makeshift bed, listening harder. It gave me goosebumps, because something did sound off in place of them eventually. A very low, very deep growl, the kind that you can almost feel in your bones, and gives you a primal sense of dread, like you're a prey animal. What was worse was that it sounded like it was just off in the trees to the west of where my hammock sat on the deck, less than 20 feet from the house. I felt like a little kid again, afraid of the boogeyman coming for me. I had never heard that kind of growl in my entire life, aside from when our neighbor had trapped a rabid bobcat. It was almost similar to that. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I immediately went back inside. The next morning, I woke up to find my parents outside, talking softly. They were looking down at something below the deck. I joined them to see what the fuss was about, and when I did, my stomach turned. Below the deck was a dead deer, not the long dead and rotting kind that the dogs dragged up from time to time. No, this doe was freshly killed. What was worse was the claw marks on it. Its eyes glazed over in sheer panic. I knew that it had to have been whatever I had heard that night. At first, I chalked it up to a mountain lion passing through, even though that was rare. It did sometimes happen. But that belief all changed when my folks went inside to get ready for the day. "Go take that carcass to the tree line," my dad said as he turned back to the door. "Don't want any yotes coming up to the house." I agreed and headed for the stairs that led you down the side of this deck. As I got to the first step, I stopped dead in my tracks. There on the deck were paw prints, still wet from the morning dew, but starting to fade and dry. They weren't big cat prints. No, these were like a very, very large dog's or wolf's print, with claw marks, much like a dog. But something wasn't quite right. They seemed almost long and narrow. Even worse still, there was only one print on each step, and I counted 4 steps that only had one print. On the 5th step, it appeared as though whatever it was stepped up and stood there for a moment. But that's where the prints ended. My blood ran cold, and I felt nauseous when I realized that this thing had to have been walking on only 2 feet. I remember calling the dogs with me as I dragged the remains of that poor deer into the tree line on the property. That was the last night I slept outdoors for a long time. I started having nightmares of large dog-like creatures that walked upright. Those nightmares lasted for years. I eventually brushed off that strange occurrence until I was in college. That is where my second story begins. I decided I needed to get far away from Kansas for a while, so I moved to the Northwest for college. I loved every moment of it. I met my now husband there, who, for privacy, we will call Jay. We both studied wildlife management. I focused on predator behavior, while he was more interested in hunting game. It was out here in the wide open expanse of prairie and the steep mountain ranges that I experienced something else that was like the paw prints on the deck. I loved those mountains and plains. I loved the people there, and I would give anything to experience those memories again, except for one. My new friends and I had taken up the habit of going on late-night drives out to the national forests and grasslands that butted up against a native reservation. Out there, we would have cheesy Nerf gun wars with our headlamps and jack-around, all while being totally sober. I know we were rather odd kids in college, but that's why we all clicked so well. On this particular evening, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, tagged along too, as we were going somewhere close to the reservation at night and wanted to make sure we were safe. Now, this reservation was unfortunately not the safest place to venture out to, as the crime rate and the gang violence was beginning to be an issue. So I understand why he felt the need to come along with 4 young women at midnight. My 3 friends were much more adventurous than I was, and they were venturing much farther out than I was. It was cold that night, so cold you could see your breath. I remember I could hear them laughing and breaking through the dry grass, and hearing the ping of the Nerf guns. Every so often you would see a headlamp move in the dark as they got farther away. I decided to stay with my boyfriend and sit on the tailgate of the truck as he drank a beer. We cuddled up and chuckled at my friends' antics. You could hear them whooping and hollering as they shot at each other. I remember my one friend call out to the others that they should play hide-and-seek Nerf war in the dark, while the 2 other gals agreed. After a few moments, they were all silent as the 2 had found their hiding spots, and one person looked for them. That was when things got really weird. Jay sat up straighter, like he was straining to hear something. "Do you hear that?" he asked me. I listened for anything, but there was nothing. "No," I said. "I don't hear anything at all. What's the problem?" "That is the problem," he said, and you could hear worry in his voice. I realized he was absolutely right. It was dead silent. No birds, no coyotes, no squirrels, nothing except for my friends, who were all crunching in the grass somewhere ahead of us in the dark. I got that familiar feeling of dread, like I felt many years prior, the night I heard that growl back in Kansas. Except this time, I knew more about wildlife. Jay and I both said it at the same time. There's a predator nearby. In the natural world, you learn in wildlife that things don't go quiet unless an apex predator is in the area, stalking or hunting. We listened in silence for a few moments, trying to determine if whatever this predator was near us. Usually, if it was a big cat or even a bear or wolf, if they heard people, they would give us a big clearance and sound would return in about 10 minutes. Something in my gut told me that this wasn't any of those things. No, predators don't normally mess with people, much less stalk or remain elusive. They will usually flee quickly. I began feeling like we were all being watched. Jay must have felt the same way, because he yelled to my friends, "Guys, come back to the truck. I think there's something hunting out here. Better to give it some space." My friends were silent for a few moments, as they all listened too. They were also wildlife students, and 2 of them lived in the mountains, and were well versed in predator behavior. There was still heavy silence, before one of my friends hollered back with, "Yeah, you're right. It's super quiet out here." I could hear them making their way back towards the truck through all the brush, and let out a relieved sigh. The night's fun might have been short, but it was for the best. I could see their 3 headlamps about 15 feet from the truck when something caught all of our attention. To the left of the truck, what sounded like a way out was something else moving through the dry grass. It sounded like something that was moving slowly, but making deliberate steps towards us. Jay yelled now, "Guys, hurry the hell up and get in the truck!" My friend sprinted to the doors of the truck, as Jay and I hopped in too. Once we were all in, we locked the doors and fired the engine up. The headlights turned on, and we all stared in stunned silence. There, just where the headlights faded into darkness, about 30 feet ahead of us, you could see eye reflections. It was the height of them that terrified me the most. They were almost 8 feet off the ground and standing perfectly still. Large yellow reflections that didn't blink. But that wasn't all we saw. An almost invisible outline of something large and shaggy with pointed ears stood so still that you would almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. But we were paying attention. I remember all of us gasping, then falling into a silent horror. It could have been a bear, but bears don't walk on their hind legs for long, and this thing was walking backwards away from the truck's headlights on 2 legs. It was moving backwards, while its eyes remained locked on us. It looked like the body of an extremely tall person, but shaggy like a German shepherd's coat, with tall, pointy ears, exactly like a dog or a wolf. We never saw the face, but I'm not sure I wanted to see that. Just as soon as we saw the eyes, it disappeared, like smoke into the dark night. The 4 girls, including myself, were silent, staring in out the windshield. It was Jay who was the first to act. He shifted into reverse and peeled out of there so quickly, one of my friends fell into the front seat. I remember how fast he drove out of there, and I was glad we were on gravel roads in the middle of the grasslands, because we would have surely been pulled over for speeding if a cop was out there. We didn't slow down until we got into the city, and even then, we all rushed into one of my friend's dorms. That was where we all stayed until morning. Jay and I slept on the floor, while one girl took the armchair and two girls slept in the bed. We didn't sleep all that much. We talked for most of the night about what we saw. We all agreed that it made no sense logically. All of us were extremely shaken up, but no one wanted to state the obvious of what we saw. I'm a few years out of college now, back in Kansas, and married to Jay. All my friends and I have gone our separate ways, but we still all talk. I truly don't know what to think about these two occurrences. From what I have researched, I believe I have encountered a dogman or werewolf of sorts. I think it's odd that I've experienced this twice, and maybe they were totally unrelated events. But deep down, I feel like whatever I saw and heard was the same kind of thing. I apologize for the length of this story, but I felt like it was important to explain all this in one sitting. I don't really know where else to share it, as I don't quite know what to make of it myself. However, what I will admit is this whole situation has made me realize that there are things lurking in the Midwest, just as there are in the mountains. So, keep your eyes peeled and your ears pricked, and always pay attention to your surroundings. It lurks. From Bubbles. This encounter happened a few nights ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. I'm going to start this out by saying that recently, I've developed a habit of taking late-night walks. This night was no different. The night was calm, starlit, and held a slight chill. Nevertheless, I threw on my hoodie, grabbed my phone and headphones, and stepped outside. Instantly, I felt relieved. Walking down the road towards the forest, I switched on my music, putting my playlist on shuffle. A gentle breeze blew past me, carrying the scent of damp leaves. I didn't mind, though. This is why I came out here. At this moment, I had yet to feel that something was amiss, so I was relaxed. Alert, but relaxed. After 5 minutes of walking, I reached the small forest that was by my house. As I navigated by the slivers of moonlight that shone through the trees, I made my way to the fallen tree that I liked to sit on. Tonight, like all nights, I lay on my back, resting on the fallen tree and watching the stars. That's when it happened. The atmosphere shifted, crickets and nightlife going silent. Even the wind stopped. Immediately, I sat up, a sense of unease washing throughout my body. I had to leave now. As quietly as I could, I hopped off of the fallen tree and began making my way back out of the dark forest, towards the road, towards home, towards safety. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a feeling of dread sinking deeper and deeper into my stomach. The longer I was in the forest, the stronger a primal terror spread throughout my body. Forcing myself to walk, I kept a constant pace, being as silent as I could. Which wasn't very, due to there being leaves littering the forest floor. Given, a good number of them were damp, but not nearly enough. Those that were not damp crunched under the weight of my steps. Pushing towards the road, I came within view of the big fallen log. The scent hit me before I saw it. A reeking, rotting stench that seemed to cling to my skin and fill my nose. That's when I saw it, the source of my primal dread. It was hunched over, behind the log, blocking my way home, blocking my way to safety. From what I could see, it was incredibly pale and humanoid. Yet there was no mistaking it. This was not a person. It had not yet noticed me, and I intended to keep it that way. Seconds after this thought entered my mind, its head snapped up, looking in my direction. That was when I got a look at its face. Very human-like, yet it was incredibly otherworldly. The first thing I noticed was its eyes. Well, its lack of discernible eyes. All I could distinguish were hollow pits that held an abyssal darkness, deeper than the darkest nights. Yet I could feel their gaze on me, watching, waiting for my next move. The next thing I noticed was its mouth, full of jagged, yellowing, sharp teeth. Then it stood. It easily towered over me, standing at least 7 feet tall. I could count each rib. It looked like it hadn't eaten a day in its life. It looked hollow, yet you could easily tell it possessed strength far beyond what it looked capable of. Conveniently, the song Old Doll by Eeriecast began playing in the one headphone I had in. Fitting for the mood, right? We stood there, as if neither of us expected to see the other there. Its hand rested on the tree that it now stood behind. 5 fingers, each elongated and ending in what looked to be razor-sharp claws. This thing was made for killing. You could tell. Its head tilted, and suddenly I felt its gaze shift from me and onto something behind me. Without a sound, it darted from behind the tree, racing past me and towards whatever was behind me. I took this chance to book it out of there. Risking a glance behind myself, I found out what it had been looking at. A lone buck, now fallen. Looking forward once more, I made it to the road and sprinted home. As soon as I entered my home, I shut the door behind me, locking it. I believe that deer was what saved me from what could have been a very deadly encounter. I know what I saw was real. If not for that deer, I may not be here. The very next morning, as I was at the bus stop, waiting for my bus to school, I saw a deer. Not just any deer. It seemed to be the same deer, the same buck. Even from a distance, I could make out how wrong it looked. Its limbs were bent at the wrong angles. Its flesh seemed loose. Some deep part of me knew that this deer was what I had seen only hours ago. There are things here that are not of this world. Some are benevolent, some are malevolent. All I have to say is be alert, and most importantly, trust your gut. Remember, it lurks. It wanted me alone. From Polar Flip. I've never been a stranger to the paranormal, but what happened that night was terrifying. I hope to never experience anything like it again. For some context, I live in northern Alabama, an area known for its haunted places. One of these spots is Devil's Bridge. I don't know much about the history of the place, but I've heard it's an old, crumbling bridge that's said to be haunted. It all started at my friend Kay's house. Along with Kay, there was L, J, and W. Kay mentioned that he knew of a place we should check out. He said it would be fun, and we could just hang out for a bit. Being the adventurous type, I agreed, even though I'd never heard of this place before. I thought it would be cool to explore. At the time, Elle was the only one who could drive, but she agreed to take us, on the condition that someone would stay with her. Since it was already around 2 a.m., she didn't want to be alone. So we all piled into the car and set off, jamming to music and singing along, the usual pre-haunt excitement. As we neared the bridge, though, I started to feel like we weren't alone. The sensation was eerie, and it made me hesitate about getting out of the car. We parked and spent a few minutes talking about the buddy system. Who would stick with whom? Elle and I decided to stay together. However, shortly after we started walking, Elle said she was getting a bad feeling and couldn't breathe, so she decided to go back to the car. I was fine with that, so I watched her walk back to the car. It wasn't far, and I could still see her get in. At that point, I realized K, W, and J were way ahead of me, so I decided to catch up. The road was dark, and I soon lost sight of them. I figured they must have turned off or gotten far enough ahead that I couldn't see them. But as I kept walking, the strange feeling intensified, and it felt like I was being watched. My heart started to race, and I picked up my pace. Eventually, I caught up to them. They were laughing off to the side of the road and asked if I was okay. I told them I was fine, just a little creeped out. We continued walking until we reached the bridge. To be honest, it wasn't much to look at. It was just an old, falling-apart structure. We stood around talking when, once again, I got the feeling of being watched. That's when I decided to head back to the car. I told the others, and they said they would start walking back shortly after me. I agreed and started heading in the direction of the car. I was about 50 feet away from them when I heard running behind me. I spun around, but all I saw were K, W, and J still standing there. Confused, I turned back around and kept walking. But then I heard the running again, this time accompanied by the sound of dogs barking from somewhere to the side of me. I turned, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. No house, no dogs, just darkness. I looked back again, but still saw nothing. My anxiety spiked. I began to run back to the car. When I finally got in, I told Elle to lock the doors. I didn't want to take any chances. I told her not to unlock them until Kay and the others were back. A few minutes later, we heard banging on the doors. I turned around, and there they were, K, W, and J looking terrified. Elle unlocked the doors and they jumped inside, all of them yelling to drive. Elle and I were confused, but we did as they asked, starting the car and driving away. Once they calmed down, Kay explained what had happened. As they were walking back, they heard something behind them, but they tried to laugh it off. But then Kay turned around and saw a tall figure walking toward them. Before he could even say anything, he saw W and J running the other way. Kay followed them, hearing the same eerie dog barking that I had heard. They were all shaken, and honestly, so was I. I've heard of creatures like wendigos and flesh crawlers. I don't use their actual names just in case, but I never thought they could be near me, especially since the nearest Native American tribe was over an hour away. But the way those dogs were barking made me wonder if something was mimicking the sound, or if the dogs were trying to warn us about whatever was out there. I hope I never see or hear those things again. Possible Wendigo or Skinwalker in the Laplands, from Capitan Stark. A few years ago, in late November or early December, I was going on a camping trip. I left early in the morning because in Finland, the sun doesn't come up during winter, so I had a few hours of light before complete darkness. When I left, I had taken my hunting knife and my hunting rifle, and an extra gas can with me. At first, I was just riding around the woods, and about 20 kilometers in the woods, I started to smell a horrible odor. I gagged because I had never smelt such a horrible smell, even though I go hunting for moose every year and have found rotting animal carcasses. I started looking for the source of the smell, but could not find it. Soon just going around, the smell disappeared. I just shrugged it off and kept moving. A few hours later, I had gotten to my target area for a campsite. When I had gotten my camp up, I decided to check the gas in my snowmobile and realized that it was almost empty, so I filled it up with my extra gas can. When it started to get dark and cold, I got the fire going and rested. Some info about my campsite. The area I chose to camp at was a small clearing, so I could see all around me clearly if there was light. There were thick woods all around me, about 200 meters away from my camp. After it had gotten dark, my fire was starting to go out, so I ran to the edge of the woods to get some firewood and went back to the camp. I managed to save the fire, but the smell from earlier came back. I wanted to leave because of the smell, but it was too dark now to go on the small trail, and I would get easily lost if I lost the trail. So I decided to stay put and just deal with the smell. Over time, I realized that the smell was getting worse for a bit, but then it stopped getting closer at the edge of the woods. I grabbed my headlamp from my bag and put it on, Then I heard something that made my heart drop. The voice of my cousin, who lives over 100 kilometers away. When I looked around, I saw a red eye glint at the edge of the woods. I decided to pack up and leave, but right before I was able to start up my snowmobile, I heard really fast footsteps in the snow, and something pulled me off the snowmobile. It started dragging me to the woods with incredible strength. I had my knife on my belt, so I grabbed it and stabbed the thing in the hand, and it let go and let out a horrible scream like a woman and an elk combined. I still had my headlamp on and looked at the thing, and I saw this half-rotten wolf-like thing running away. I was horrified. It had dragged me into the woods in a couple of seconds from about 200 meters away. I started running back to the snowmobile, and when I reached it, I started pulling on the cord. When it finally started, I just sped off, leaving half of my stuff that I'd dropped when the thing had dragged me away. I still had my rifle with me on a handle I'd made for it on the snowmobile. I was speeding way too fast on the small trail, and I started hearing screaming around me as if there were more of them, and keeping up with a snowmobile on hard snow, moving over 80 kilometers per hour. I reached a long straight in the trail, so I locked the gas on full and grabbed my rifle and fired into the woods at the screams and hoped it would hit one of them, or at least scare them away. I fired 3 shots, but I don't think any of them hit. At one point, the screams just stopped. I kept riding home, and after about an hour or 2 of riding, I finally reached my home. I just ran in and locked all the doors and windows. I think I passed out from pure terror, because I remember waking up the next day at 10:26. I grabbed my rifle off the floor and went outside. When I checked my snowmobile, I saw a patch of pure black hair stuck on the hook at the back, and saw big claw marks on the back of the snowmobile. I started walking back to my house and saw that there were similar claw marks on my front door. I realized that they never went away and followed me home. They know where I live, but luckily to this day I haven't seen, heard, or smelled them again. I haven't told anyone about this because skinwalkers or wendigos aren't supposed to be a thing in Finland. And every time I hear the voice of my cousin, I'm reminded of that trip. I have stopped hunting and have moved to the closest city called Rovaniemi. I still do not visit the forest to this day. That trip really traumatized me. About a year after that incident, I decided to visit my hometown with my family for my grandfather's funeral. I had sold my old home, but my grandfather's old home was still in my family's possession, so me and my family stayed there for the week. My father and I hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, so we talked about what we had been doing. I told my father about my job as an IT supporter in Rovaniemi. We talked for a couple of hours and visited our old neighbors. They were all really close to my grandfather. After all, they had served with my grandfather in the continuation war with the USSR. We visited some places I used to go to as a child for a few days. On Friday, I told my story about the thing to my father. He didn't believe me, of course, and he said, since it's winter, we could go there with snowmobiles. I was still scared of the thing, but since I always wanted to prove things to my father, I decided to go. We put on some warm clothes and packed some sandwiches, coffee, and a tent. We also took hunting rifles with us. When we left, it was still morning, so there was plenty of light out. But if you remember, it takes a long time to get where I camped and got attacked. This time on the way, there was no rotting smell. After we got to my old campsite, the sun had started going down, and it was already pretty dark. We turned on our headlamps and put up the tent. The whole time I was terrified of every noise from the woods. There were a couple of foxes in that area, so we heard them walking on the snow. We made a fire almost in the same spot as my old fire, so the fire lit up the same area as the last time I was here. We could see a wide area, but the light ended right at the edge of the woods. My father knew I was absolutely terrified being here again, so he started talking about my grandfather with me. I loved my grandfather so much, so talking about him made me forget about the thing. We talked for a couple of hours, and around 11 we started getting tired. When we were going to sleep, I smelled it. The horrible rotten stench, unmistakable, the same as before. My father smelled it too. The smell woke us right up. My father started gagging from the smell and went outside to see where it came from. I told him to stay in the tent and stay quiet. He didn't listen to me and went out. I was scared I would lose him, so I took my gun and went out with him. I said we need to leave right now. I started our snowmobiles and saw my father staring at one spot in the woods. I turned my head to see what he was staring at, and I froze. There it was. The thing that attacked me a year ago. It was at the edge of the woods, about 200 meters away. It looked like a rotten wolf standing upright. We heard my grandfather's voice come from that thing. Hearing his voice from it filled me with rage, and I shot at it. I reloaded and shot it again and again and again. My father started shooting at it too. It ran away, screaming in my grandfather's voice. My father and I hopped on our snowmobiles and sped away. We heard it screaming behind us. It had started chasing us like last time. We were speeding down the small trail way too fast, and I ended up crashing into a tree. I flew off the snowmobile and got up shakily. I took my rifle and hopped on my father's snowmobile and started shooting at the thing. I hit it in the leg, and it fell down from that. We heard it screaming. It sounded like it was a woman and an elk screaming together. We got out of the woods after riding for about an hour and a half. We went inside quickly when we got to our property. We left early the next morning. Neither my father nor I have told my mother or sister about this. I don't think we ever will. Longest, scariest 5 minutes of my life. From Desmond. I live on a reservation in Canada, Saskatchewan. A lot of trees and forest around where the reservation is, close by the river. I remember a time when I was 15 years old. I left my uncle's place to return home. My uncle lived a little ways away from the reservation. It was a 15 to 20-minute walk. Once I started walking in the pitch of night, well, there was light, but not from the sky, only from the reservation, from a distance. There weren't really any other houses around where my uncle lived either. I walked that road many times before, but on this night, something felt different. As I was walking down the road, I began to hear footsteps coming close to me. As I stopped, it also stopped, like it was trying to hide from me. I looked around to see who it was and saw nothing. I tried to disregard it and began to walk again. As soon as I started to walk a few steps, I heard it again. But this time when I stopped, the footsteps quietly continued walking toward me. I had no doubt something was there, so I turned back around and started walking towards home a bit faster. Then I noticed something circling around me. I couldn't see well at all. The only light source was shining from the houses, which were at a distance, and I could only see a silhouette of something circling around me. It wasn't much taller than me. The thought going through my head was, "Just walk, don't run, it will leave me alone." I was scared, trying to remain calm. From what I could see, it was obvious that whatever this wasn't a person that I was sure of. It must have circled around a couple of times. The closer I got to home, the more light was around us. Once I made it under a streetlight, it seemed to just disappear. I looked for it, but couldn't see or hear anything following me. Probably the 5 most terrifying minutes of my life. I'm glad I made it home. I'm glad it didn't attack me, or else I don't think I'd be telling you this story. Till this day, I don't know what it was, and now I only walk down that road during daylight, just to be safe. Watcher in the Woods, from Marshall's Skeleton. "Mama, there's a bad man by my window at night," my 3-year-old said. 3-year-olds are brutally honest. Was there truth to her story, or was her sighting of this man a figment of her active imagination? I shuddered uneasily. Hey, at least the kid didn't utter the cliched movie phrase, "I see dead people." "It's just a bad dream," I told her, my mind scanning the recent news headlines of a kidnapping and an accidental fall death in our area. True news tales that leave mothers terrified. As I grabbed a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the bare trees in the woods adjoining our house, their blackened arms reaching out skeletally. I had been feeling as uneasy as the kid had lately, because I truly think there's something or someone out there in these woods. For the past few nights, I have awakened around 4 a.m. and heard leaves crunching underfoot, as if someone is walking around our house. Once I thought I even heard breathing and the muffled conversation of a man, uttering swear words under his breath. A girl's body was recently discovered in the canyon near the woods where we live. The story was all over the local news, as well as national. An Amber Alert went out. The sheriff's department had canines search for the missing teen, and they eventually recovered her body at the bottom of a cliff in the woods here. A middle-aged male neighbor was the last to report speaking with her, and stated that he saw her wander into the woods. I'm not sure if he had anything to do with her disappearance or not, but the sheriff's department cleared him. Her death was labeled an accidental fall. She was reportedly poorly dressed for the weather in house slippers and was found carrying a violin case. So, the girl slipped and fell. The accidental fall explains this one instance, but doesn't explain the other things that occur in these woods. Like the Jane Doe body of a middle-aged woman found in these woods, with no known identity or history, but lost. There has never been an explanation for her. The news stories just called Jane Doe's death suspicious. So when I hear the crunching of leaves at night, or hear about my child's unpleasant new friend, I wonder if there truly is a watcher in these woods, or if it is all just a bad dream. But that wondering turned more realistic a few nights ago when I heard a male growl utter more swear words under his breath near my window during the witching hour in the blackness of night. I heard the figure's footsteps quickening and the sound of tree branches breaking. Have you ever met anyone who just left a bad impression in your mind? That this person might have a slight cruel streak or lack of conscience due to either a bad upbringing or pure and strong, simple, innate wickedness. I met someone like that not long ago. It was as if they had no stop button at times, and a sort of self-preoccupation that was total. I'm starting to wonder if this person made a sort of transfer into our dreams, or outside our windows. After all this, my opinion is starting to lean toward the watcher in the woods being real, and not just a figment of our imaginations. But I'm still deciding, still making up my mind. Perhaps I should keep a log or a diary of the sounds we hear in the woods, as well as a news clipping binder of the people who go missing around here. In time, I will catch the watcher in the woods, and trust me, I'm not inviting him to our bonfire. The Headless Man in the Woods, from Devin Poirier. I remember the time my friend went out of town for the weekend and entrusted me with her 3 beautiful golden retrievers. I'd watched her dogs before and was always very excited to see them. Her house was situated far out in the woods, surrounded by lush trees and chirping birds. It was a beautiful summer evening, and everything seemed perfect at first when I let the 3 dogs out to use the bathroom. The 2 oldest ones came back inside in no time, but the youngest was missing. I frantically searched for him, calling out his name and looking under bushes and behind trees. My heart sank when I couldn't find him anywhere. The thought of having to tell my friend that I had lost her dog terrified me. With tears in my eyes, I finally spotted the dog lying beneath a tree in the far corner of the garden. I rushed towards him and checked him over to ensure he wasn't injured. But as I looked up, I saw something that I could never forget. A tall and thin man just wandering the woods, but the most distinctive feature was that he had no head. He was just walking near the woods, just a few meters away from me. I was frozen, unable to move a muscle. The man continued to just walk around there for a few seconds, and then gradually walked off into the woods. I was relieved to see him leave, and immediately ran back to the house with the dog in my arms. After that night, I never went back to my friend's house, and she never knew why I stopped taking care of her dogs. But the memory of that spine-chilling incident has remained with me till this day, and I still get goosebumps whenever I think of that chilling night. However, I remain somewhat curious about that man, if he's still out there wandering, but I'm never ever going out there to find out. Ever. It could have been me. From Anonymous. I grew up in a mid-sized town, pretty close to the New Hampshire border, called Townsend, Massachusetts. It wasn't what you'd consider suburbia. This was the 80s, and Townsend was still fairly rural outside of the downtown area, and especially in my neighborhood. Now it's important to note that the kids in my town roamed the woods like feral creatures, from using the mostly abandoned train tracks as shortcuts to downtown, to blazing trails between friends' houses. We claimed the woods as our own. This comfort with the woods is what led to one of my Sunday school friends and her family being murdered, and I'm almost certain it could have been my family a couple years prior. You see, one street over from me, or a short trek through the woods, was the home of Daniel LaPlante, the 17-year-old who murdered Abby, Billy, and their mother, Priscilla Gustafson, in 1987. Maybe a year prior. I'm looking back about 30 years, so forgive me if my recollections of dates aren't spot on. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and feeling really uncomfortable. I scanned my room, which was more of a long, wide hall leading to a smaller room than a proper room, not really expecting to see anything more than my black cat causing a ruckus. As my eyes adjusted completely to the dim light filtering in through the window at the foot of my bed, I slowly started making out the figure of a person standing in the doorway to the smaller room. Luckily for me, my bladder wasn't full, as I certainly would have emptied it when I realized there was someone else in my room. I went with the duck under the covers maneuver, and hoped I was either A, dreaming, or B, seeing things, right up until I felt a hand on my left thigh. You are completely right if you guessed I fainted. Had I screamed, I'm sure I would have been killed then and there, with my parents not far behind me. The postscript to this is that I told Abby, about a week before she was murdered, to grow her fingernails out, and if anyone tries to hurt her, to go for the eyes. And she did. She went for his eyes, and the coroner took his skin from beneath her nails. R.I.P. Abby. I tried. The Dwell Lights, from Dutch van der Linde 5. De Dwaallichten, or Dwell Lights, is an old Dutch legend about how when you are all alone in the forest, you can sometimes see lights in the distance. It is said that these lights are fairies that try to trick you into coming to them. When you do come to them, it is said that they kill you or try to bring you to their king. Some say that they guard a treasure. Here's one of the encounters I had with the Dwell Lights. I was sitting on a bench in the woods, smoking a cigarette. It had been a long night of drinking and partying. I decided to get some rest and enjoy the quietness of the woods when I suddenly saw something in the distance. A small light. It looked like someone was pointing a flashlight at me, I was afraid and curious at the same time. Ultimately, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I got closer, I constantly heard singing. Once I was close enough, I saw a creature looking at me with a creepy smile. I decided I had enough and ran home. Once I was home, I slammed and locked the door. But once inside, I saw blood on the wall. In folklore, it is said that when you get home after running from a dwell light, there will be blood on the wall. And I passed out. When I woke up, I constantly heard that thing calling me. Now, a sane person would obviously not go outside, but I felt drawn to it. It was hard to resist. Despite that pull, I did not, a decision that probably saved my life. I still wonder what would have happened if I did go outside. My mother was almost a changeling, and so was I. From Gojo's 6 Eyes. Behind every expression, there's a reason, and for every reason, there's a cause. Have you ever heard of grim nursery rhymes? Or very popular sayings that have become so entrenched in daily life that the origins become drowned in obscurity, and the warnings between the lines become completely forgotten in favor of the deceiving humor contained within? There's a funny saying in my language that can roughly be translated in English as, "You better return my real child," or "You better give your parents their real child back, because you must have been switched in utero or at birth." Obviously, a lot of context and expression is lost in translation, but you should get the point. Anyway, this phrase is mostly said in jest, disappointment, or vexation, because it really depends on the context, but usually it's said in jest. For instance, you're doing something silly, and your parents make the statement because they're finding you so funny or embarrassing, and are playfully accusing you of not belonging to them, in harmless, bantering deliver. It's all laughs if you don't wonder why such a strange statement is even a thing. Thinking about it at all makes you wonder who came up with that. Well, good thing I'm a curious asker, not to be confused with a curious doer. Because we don't do that in this household, thank you very much. I was watching a funny video, and the actress made a similar comment. I'll admit it threw me into a severe fit of giggles, but my curiosity was piqued once again, and I just thought, okay, I need to ask my parents. My mother told me that the statement is based on a very, very old belief, and yet still a very common occurrence according to her. The word paro means to switch. Just keep that in mind. My father was there for this one, so I got a double scoop of info. My mother told me what her mother told her regarding herself while she was in utero. Now, in my culture, there's a lot of don'ts for pregnant women, but I'll just list the ones relevant to this tale. 1. Do not go out at high noon. 2. Do not go out late into the night. Honestly, anything from 6 p.m. is really pushing it. 3. Avoid natural bodies of water, forests, hills, mountains, etc. at all costs. And if you must do any of these taboos, then the last option is a must do. But it really should be done anyway, even if you're sticking to the rules. 4. Always have either granite stone tied to the end of your wrap skirt. That's a traditional everyday outfit we wear. It wraps all around your waist and middle, till you tuck the last end in. Ideally, the stone would end on your side or close to your middle. The point is that it's within the area of your belly. Or you hook a safety pin in your cloth, directly placed on your belly button or in the middle of your pregnant belly. The idea is that the granite or pin functions as a doorman of a sort, or think of it as a sign that says rented. Otherwise, the absence of either of these two objects would be a for rent sign. See, the thing is, there's so many unseen or seen by specific types of people, beings that want to hitch a ride to the physical part of our universe for whatever reason, and they sometimes either just come as your regular, normally conceived adorable baby, because where you do the spicy tango that led to conception, is also a huge factor in that, but that's a discussion for another day. The point is that being conceived is considered a huge privilege to the ones who remain unseen, and some will just hijack the ride by rudely kicking out the fetus snuggled in utero. An act we morbidly call eating, sending off, exchange, whichever. These entities are usually on the prowl at very high noon or really late nights, and because they're creatures of nature, whether positive or negative, places such as bodies of water, mountains, or forests are off limits. And if you must, you need to hang your rented sign on your body, or else. For example, if you have a beautiful tree in your compound and want no freeloading creepy crawlers in there, and I don't mean the bugs and furry animals, you nail multiple or even just one nail in the tree and you're good to go. Apologies for the rambling, but it's paramount that all details are given to understand the tale. So my mother told me that my grandmother, while pregnant with her for some reason, didn't have her granite or pin on her as she made her way home well past dark. My mother said that as my grandmother walked home, she saw a hunter. They have a very specific look. Anyone would know the instant they saw them, in the distance coming towards her, so they were walking opposite directions. As they got closer to each other and almost passing by each other, the man stepped away from her a bit, yelling, "Are you mad, woman?" My grandmother, who was rightfully startled at the sudden reaction. "What do you mean? Are you mad? Do you have me confused with someone else?" she retorted in confusion and annoyance. "No, are you mad? Can't you see that thing standing right by you from one side of you to the other? Can't you see it?" he screamed back at her. Now you must know that my grandmother definitely wasn't a stranger to the changeling beliefs or tales, and neither was she new to motherhood, given that my mother was her third pregnancy. She knew she was in the wrong, and probably just hoped she wouldn't have anything to worry about as she made her way home. But upon the man's reaction, figured that she was wishing on stars and immediately started looking all around, terrified, wondering, how long had whatever this man is seeing been tailing her? Was her baby long gone? Would it have followed her home? What did it look like? But the man just rummaged through the little sack with him and presented a little nail and approached her with a lot of apprehension and hesitation. He got closer, pointing the nail at an empty space beside my grandmother, saying, "This is not your vehicle to life. Find another and be going on your way. I mean you no harm, so go on your own way." As he slowly got closer, not taking his eyes away, and not even acknowledging my grandmother, who was shaking like a leaf in a storm. The man continued on, like he was responding to someone, maintaining his ready-to-fight stance, and then he suddenly straightened and immediately dashed towards my grandmother, who screamed and backed away. But he grabbed her and pinned the nail through the fabric of her shirt. Then he gave her such a disdain-filled glare and said, "What would you have done if fate didn't cross our paths? You caused me so much unnecessary trouble today. I don't think my hunt will be good this night. If that thing hadn't been struggling with how to swap your child, it would have been over. Come, I'll escort you towards your home. We'll part ways when you're close enough. It'll likely be back, because it seems determined to swap with your child." Eventually, they parted ways when he deemed it safe for her to do so, and she ran the little distance left to get home, looking over her shoulder in fear. As a child, I always saw my mother with a huge safety pin on the belly button part of her clothes when she was pregnant with my siblings. I just never knew why. I'll continue by retelling my mother's experience while she was pregnant with me. My father being there for this conversation made it even more interesting, I guess, because I got the story from both of their perspectives as they experienced this event together. I'm their first child, so I guess it makes it all the more a terrifying and traumatic experience because of how new they were to parenthood. Both my parents were married in their very early 20s and eventually expected to welcome my esteemed self in their mid-late 20s. So the tale goes thus. My parents were at a church event that took place in the wilderness. Yes, you heard right, the wilderness. It usually is a specific designated spot in nature, open air, on top of a huge flat hilly rock formation or near natural bodies of water like a beach or river. The idea is that it's supposed to be a spiritual retreat as close to nature as possible. However, people go well prepared with sleeping bags and enough food for the duration that usually is between 3 to 7 days, all the camping essentials, and of course professional medical staff in case of emergencies. So they're not just unprepared in the middle of nowhere. If you were wondering why pregnant women went for such an event, it's just a common thing for pregnant women to go to these with family. My parents went on one of these retreats and everything was fine for a couple of days, until that one specific day. My parents went into town for a little break from the retreat activities. Once again, this was normal for the program because people could restock on essentials, or just relax in the comforts of modern society. So while on one of these trips into the nearby town, my mother got a bit exhausted from the task of carrying the greatness of myself within her, and naturally had to rest. My father decided to get her something to eat, and left her sitting on a huge flat rock to find her snack. It was a nice town surrounded by rich green forestry, which made the air fresher, cleaner, with beautiful large rocky hills surrounding the entire town. My mother sat on a cool-to-touch rock under the shade of a tree. It was a crisp and dewy morning, and as she rested, she said that she got slightly uncomfortable because I tended to move a lot when she wasn't in motion for a while, or sitting in a tub filled with water. Then she felt like she was being watched, but couldn't see anyone or anything. A couple of minutes passed by, and my movements got even worse, and she started to feel some pain at this point. She was so occupied trying to get comfortable when she felt a hand on her shoulder, startling her, and as she spun around, she saw a woman standing behind her, with her arm still on her shoulder, asking if she was fine. My mother just simply said she was fine, and was just a bit tired. The woman stared at her for a couple of seconds, eyes going down to my mother's belly, then saying, "Oh, the first time is usually the most troublesome." And my mother just stared in awe that she knew it was her first pregnancy, and asked her in mild excitement how she knew, to which she responded with, "I can see it, it's not covered," but my mother simply thought she meant it. She could see the obvious bump, and that her reactions to my movements and such made it obvious she was a first-time mother. So she told the woman she thinks it's so fascinating that women could tell these things just by observation. She got a wide smile from the woman, who said that she has a lot of experience with babies, and offered to help my mother, who said that I was moving more than she'd ever experienced, and it was causing her pain. The woman offered to help my mother, who asked how she could possibly help with my moving around, and she got the response, "I'll just take her out." It was a strange comment, but my mother was not alarmed and just thought she wasn't understanding the terminology relating to the trick the woman wanted to use. So she asked her again, "Take her out? How do you know it's a her?" And the woman just told her again, "Because I can see it." By now she's already crouched in front of my mother, telling her not to worry, that it wouldn't be painful. "I've moved a lot of babies before. She's just hiding further in you. That's why I'll take her out." As she says this, she slightly pushes my mother up, straight from her bent-over position, and makes a joke about how I was a troublesome baby, because I had hid really far inside, saying things like, "I, on the other hand, am very still. I won't bother my mother." Giving my mother pause because she didn't make the statement in past tense but in future tense. She's now starting to feel really off, and the pain from my movements increased. She said, at that point she just wanted to leave and find my father, because it felt like he had been gone for too long. But the pain was getting too intense now, and the second the woman placed a hand on her belly, she felt me give a rather violent jerk and turn, causing her to shout out in pain and jerking away from the touch. The woman just soothingly comforted her, telling her it's all going to be fine and that I was just one of the stubborn ones who refused to be moved out. My mother, against her better judgment, believes her and lets her touch all over her belly as I kept moving. This goes on a while until my mother made a statement she never should have, telling her that I usually calmed my movements whenever she sat in a tub of water. And the woman was very excited, telling my mother that there's a nearby river with nice shallows she could submerge her in to try and fix the problem. She helps my mother up and slowly walks her away from her seat and towards the direction only she knew. My mother said that by then the sun was high, bright and very hot, and she wondered how the cool, dewy, sunless morning had turned to a hot noon so quickly. They had barely gone far as she could still make out where she was sat earlier, a distance away. And then it occurred to her that my father still wasn't back and looking at the sky. It should have been hours ago, at least 5 to 7 hours, because they left for town around 8 a.m. So there was absolutely no way that much time had passed, and he still hadn't returned, and she wouldn't have just sat there for that long waiting. Besides, the whole interaction with the woman shouldn't even have been up to 5 minutes after my father left, meaning that the moment she began to converse with her till that very moment should have roughly been 7 to 10 minutes. It really wasn't a long conversation and interaction. So how did she lose so much time? She said that was when she started to truly panic on the inside, realizing that she had naively followed a stranger. Let her touch her vulnerable condition. What if the lady was leading her to some hideout where they operated on pregnant women far along and did whatever with the baby? She started to panic, recalling the woman saying she was going to take me out and had experience with it. So she started to pretend that she could no longer go further and crouched in feigned extreme pain. She said the pain was no greater than it had been, but she was using it to delay any further walking. The entire time they had been heading to this supposed river, the woman would sit my mother down a bit and try taking me out, before she would just give up and lead them further. As the woman was trying to console and encourage her to go further, my mother heard my father's voice calling her name loudly, filled with fear and worry. It startled her, and she didn't hesitate or bother wondering if she hallucinated his voice, and immediately screamed back, "I'm here!" And the woman turned to her with an expression of rage that was so shockingly contrasting to her easygoing, sympathetic, and smiling face a few seconds ago. My mother said that she took a step back in shock at the intensity of the look, as if she had just committed a horrible offense. And before either of them could put thoughts into words, my father came charging out of a nearby brush, caught sight of my mother, immediately expressing his exasperation. "Where were you? I came back and you weren't where I left you. I had to go back to camp thinking that you just couldn't wait, and then I searched for you all morning, and no one had seen you. I came back to town and searched everywhere I thought you could be. Do you know how stressed and worried I've been?" He scolded, then noticed the woman with my mother in confusion. My mother then responded, "I was there the entire time, and you didn't come even once. What are you talking about? Ask her. She was with me the entire time and can attest that I'm not lying." My father then told me that the woman just greeted him mildly and confirmed what my mother said, and my father was even more confused, responding that my mother can ask everyone back at camp about him asking if they knew where she was, because he didn't find her where he last left her, saying he had been gone less than 10 minutes before he came back and didn't see her there. He then demanded to know where my mother was going, turning to the woman and asked her if she was also part of the retreat. The woman just gave him a very long, hard stare, then turned sharply towards my mother's eyes, darting to her belly. In an annoyed tone, "It's very stubborn, it's hiding." This time my mother's dread returned, and my father marched towards them, asking what the hell she was talking about, and the woman angrily yelled at him, seemingly done with being patient, "She won't come out," then grabbed my mother's arm, pulling a bit. Let's go to the river. You said she calmed when submerged in water." My mother now knew without a doubt that this woman had bad intentions, just not sure what they were. My father pulled her off and pushed her back, yelling at her about how she was handling my mother. My mother said she just grabbed my father and told him they needed to get the hell out of there. But the woman said that my father can follow them both to the river, and that they must come with her, whether they wanted to or not. My father then told both myself and mother that when he grabbed her to pull her off, it felt like he didn't move her, but that she allowed him to move her. Her skin was very damp, cold, and smooth to hold, and yet it felt like he grabbed solid rock and attempted shifting it with one arm. The whole time they interacted, my mother never touched her, and the lady never held her anywhere past her clothed shoulder, so there was no direct skin-to-skin contact for my mother to make that observation. At that point, the announcement that all retreat members should start moving back to the camp meeting point came on. The retreat organizers usually held a megaphone with them during trips to town so that they could easily call everyone back and account for all. Anyways, that announcement came on, and they looked away from her for a moment in the direction of the call, and when they turned back to her, she was gone. They stressed that there was no possibility of her moving without their noticing. She was too close and couldn't move without making sounds with all the shrubs and trees around. Yet she was gone without a sound, and in the split second it took for them to look away. They immediately hurried out of there and joined everyone else when they retold everything to the people from the retreat. Everyone scolded my parents severely for their lack of self-preservation and berated my mother for not tying her granite to her clothes, nor for clipping the pin on her clothes in the first place. Apparently, she was a walking for rent sign. The being saw that. Plus, she was also alone and wasn't in any way cautious. In short, she was too good to be true and the perfect host. It must have looked like the luckiest find ever, and that was probably why the woman looked so livid and began to display violent behaviors. It probably took on a physical and non-threatening appearance to make it easy for the swap. My parents were literally saved by the bell, the more I think of it. Expectedly, they told their experience to my grandmother, who then confirmed how true of an experience it could be by telling them what happened to her while pregnant with my mother. They both went through a traumatic and terrifying experience, and that also answered my curiosity to the reason why the phrase existed, because it is believed that some of these swapped babies grow to be very strange sometimes and do things that cause their parents to realize or worry that they have a changeling on their hands while their own true child was long gone. However, most of the time, parents can't tell when their baby has been swapped, just simply living in blissful ignorance to it all. Forest Ranger, from Suraya Hassan. I used to work in a remote national park, far from any touch of civilization. I was a forest ranger for years and thought I'd seen it all: wild animals, survivalists, even those eerie moments when the forest falls completely silent. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. I was on my usual night patrol, walking the trails with my flashlight and radio. The forest was alive with the sound of crickets and rustling leaves, and a dense fog hung low to the ground. I was alone, as was normal. Halfway through my route, my radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice whisper my name. John. John. My blood ran cold. I pressed the button to respond, but there was only more static. I was the only ranger on duty that night. It was off-season. I tried to shake it off, thinking it might be a glitch or someone playing a joke. But as I continued, the air felt different, heavier. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like claws. And then I saw something. Standing at the edge of the path, barely visible through the fog, was a figure. It wore what looked like an old ranger uniform, faded and torn. But the face, it was empty, just darkness that swallowed the beam of my flashlight. The figure raised a hand, beckoning me forward. I froze. My heart pounded, and I felt trapped. I took a step back, then another. My flashlight flickered, and in that instant, the figure was gone. But I could still feel it out there watching me. I turned and ran, branches scratching at me as I stumbled through the forest. When I finally reached the ranger station, I locked myself inside and called for backup. When they arrived, there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone. Just the empty night. I transferred out of that park soon after, but I'll never forget what I saw. Whatever it was, I know it's still out there. Since that night, my sleep has never been the same. I wake up drenched in sweat, flashes of that faceless figure in my mind. I know I saw something that shouldn't exist. The memory stays sharp. The old uniform, the void where its face should have been, and that hand reaching out. I started asking other rangers and locals about the area. Most dismissed me or looked at me like I was crazy. Except for one, an older ranger named Thomas. When I told him what I'd seen, he went pale. "Years back we lost a ranger out there," Thomas said quietly. "Name was Dan, disappeared on a foggy night, just like you described. They found his truck near the edge of the park, engine still running, headlights pointed down an empty trail. But they never found him." Thomas leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Locals say he never left. They call him the Lost Ranger. Say he wanders the park trying to find his way back. But there's nothing left of him anymore. Just a shell, lost in the woods forever." A chill ran through me. I wasn't the only one who had seen him. I tried to move on. I took extra day shifts and avoided night patrols. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse, a shadow at the edge of the tree line, a figure on a distant hill, always gone when I looked directly at it. One night, I got a call over the radio. A group of hikers had wandered off trail and hadn't returned. The sun was setting, and I knew I'd have to go out there in the dark. My heart sank as I grabbed my gear, dreading what I knew was out there. The fog was thick, seeming to muffle all sound. The trees closed in as I followed the tracks. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that faceless figure watching me. Eventually, I found the hikers. They were huddled together, pale and terrified. One of them grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "There was someone in the fog," she whispered. "He just stood there watching us. But he had no face." I led them back as quickly as I could. When we reached safety, I reported what they'd said. My supervisor dismissed it as fear and exhaustion. But I knew better. That night, as I sat in my cabin, I heard a faint shuffling outside, followed by a soft tap on the window. My blood ran cold. Slowly, I turned toward the window. Through the foggy glass, I saw a hand pressed against the pane. Beyond it, the shadowy outline of a figure staring into my cabin. The hand slid down the window, leaving a trail before it disappeared into the fog. I didn't sleep that night, and I haven't slept well since. I met a wood sprite and named her, from Hiram A. Biff. Quite a few years ago, I ran an active outdoor YouTube channel with a good friend of mine. This encounter happened during one of our filming trips around 5 years ago here in Florida. We had just gotten a couple of cheap magnesium fire starters and were on a quick overnight trip at one of our favorite spots along the Alafia River to use and review them. We found a nice spot a dozen feet or so away from a small creek that was active during the summer rainy season. We got set up and waited for darkness to fall before we commenced filming. I was holding the camera and light while my friend was demonstrating the product. It worked well, and we soon had a fire going. We cooked our food and sat down to our meal of ramen noodles with beef jerky tossed in. We chatted for a bit as I ran back through the footage to see if it was all good. Shortly after he lights the fire in the video, I start to walk around the campsite and talk about it, doing my best to use my flashlight to show it off. For a moment in the video, my flashlight pauses at the base of a tree for a few seconds while I talk, and there's a flash of movement. I pause the camera and go back over it again. Sure enough, something is at the base of the tree. I click on my flashlight and shine it over to the base of the oak tree that I saw the movement at. And there she was. She was tiny, no more than 3 feet tall. Her skin was a light shade of green and had patches of rough-looking bark here and there. Her eyes were large and black and gleamed in the light of my flashlight. Her face was hard to make out, but there was a blunted nose and small mouth set in an unreadable and alien expression. Both of us just stared at her for a moment before she turned and disappeared into the night without a sound. My friend and I spent the remainder of the night in a pensive state, discussing what we saw and trying to reason it. She did not seem angry or hostile, mostly just curious. The following morning, we checked around the tree for anything that we could have mistaken for what we saw, but found nothing. We decided to try and track her, so we pushed into the dense brush around us and searched for about an hour. We came to a spot truly in the middle of nowhere and found the grass and foliage pressed down into bedding, like what deer do when they settle in for the night. We spread out and searched the area for signs of anything. After a few minutes, I found a small patch of black mud in the ground, and right in the middle of it was a tiny footprint that looked like it belonged to a human child of 5 or 6 years old. Nothing else. We decided to name her Lorelli. I got a distinctly feminine vibe from her when we locked eyes for that brief moment. And ever since then, every time I am out in those woods, I always call out to her to ask how she is doing and to let her know I mean her no harm. Coincidence or something else? From Unanimous. It was late October 2 years ago when it was just beginning to get cold, and my mother, Kate, decided she wanted to go far north to go for a hike she found online. Our family was small: my father, my mother, and our Chihuahua. Our walk was good for some time. To our surprise, not one other person was there, and it made for a peaceful hike. There were supposed to be old ruins from a farmstead in the 1800s, and an island to explore. It was very beautiful with pine forests, a lake, and lots of leaves, all gold, red, and brown. I wanted to go until we got to that island, no matter how long it took. What an awful idea. We were in the woods, and suddenly we noticed that we hadn't come across any trail markers in a while, and there was no path, only the moss and pine needles on the floor of the forest. Not to mention, we had lost sight of the lake, which was also not so great. It was getting dark, and we still hadn't found a path or marker, no way to get back. So we went in one direction for a little bit, but by this time, it was twilight, and the dark was setting in. My father suggested we rest, and I was not opposed to a 5-minute break. But as my father leaned against a pine tree, he recoiled in shock. His arm was warm, wet, and slippery, soaked with blood. We looked at the tree for a minute. My mother, who knew lots about medicine, cleaned my dad's arm, only to find no cuts or scrapes, almost like the tree was bleeding. I was through with finding the island and the house and was beginning to fear we'd be stuck out there for the night. Luckily, I don't know how, but my mom found the path and we headed on the right track. Or so we thought. Finally, we heard cars and found the parking lot. I realized I was starving, super thirsty, and very, very far from home, and had just hiked for 9 hours. Now the moon was out, and we just kind of sat in the car, relieved from that experience. Somehow, the 12-year-old Chihuahua kept up for 9 hours of hiking. We went to McDonald's and headed home. 2 years passed, and I couldn't wait for fall. And sure enough, October rolled around, and my mother suggested a hike. At first, I thought we'd go somewhere close, but then I had a thought. Why not visit that weird hike and try to find the island? I asked my mom and father, and they agreed, but we had to bring the dogs. Now we had our 14-year-old Chihuahua, and we had gotten an Australian Shepherd puppy who was 1 year. So we set out far, far north. We hiked, and it was beautiful. Don't get me wrong. After a while, we decided to have a picnic. We were smart enough to pack a picnic, and I thought we should eat by the lake. Once we were finished, we decided to keep walking, and we came to the forested path where my dad's arm was drenched in blood. We walked, and still, no one was there. And out of nowhere, a creature lumbered out, seeming to appear from that same part of the forest as the last incident, and stopped cold. A bear. It was mere feet away from us, and was now standing on its hind legs, staring us down. I noticed with icy horror that its fur was not fluffy or all in the same direction. This creature's hair looked like it was all the wrong way, and it was sleek and looked slippery, with an almost reddish taint to it. Something was not quite right with its posture, and its eyes were unusually too big and seemed to have a weird glow. The Australian Shepherd pup, Buck, immediately started barking at it, and my only thoughts were, oh no, he's gonna provoke it. As if hearing my thoughts, it got down on all fours and glared at Buck through its strange eyes as we stood still. So still. It growled at my dog's face, and as soon as it came, it turned and vanished. Vanished. I suggested going back to the car, and my comment was met with no disapproval. Finally, we walked back and haven't seen it since. What do you think happened? Do you think it was a coincidence or something out of the ordinary? Stay safe, everyone, and watch your back when in the woods, especially Hardy Lake trails. There's something in the woods. From Emlu versus Horror. This story happened over a couple of weeks in 2020, as the world was still locked down and everyone was stuck in their homes. My brother and I were both stuck in our rooms in online classes on a nice, warm, sunny day. As the school day came to an end, our mother wanted to take a short hike on the trail behind the clubhouse in our neighborhood. We've hiked this trail dozens of times and always had a lot of fun. So we put on our hiking boots, put my dog on a leash, and headed to the trail. About halfway through the hike, my brother and I found an almost fully intact deer skeleton, which wasn't super odd, considering we've seen coyotes in the area. We took some pictures and kept going on. We arrived at the lake at the end of the trail and stayed there for a bit before heading back. For the next few weeks or so, we kept taking hikes on that trail. My brother and I kept looking for that deer skeleton, which slowly kept being spread apart. On the third or fourth hike, we couldn't find the skeleton. We were a bit disappointed, but that wasn't the worst to come. On our way back from the hike, my dog randomly stopped dead in her tracks and started growling. For context, she has always been a very sweet and friendly dog and barely barks. She kept looking around and would not let us move for what felt like forever. But in actuality, It was probably 10 minutes or so. All of us kept looking around, scared, trying to see what my dog had sensed. Once she finally let us start going again, we were all on edge and tried to get out of the woods as fast as we could. That was the last time we went back on that trail. We still don't know what she saw. Some theories we had were maybe coyotes, or maybe a bear since they've been seen in the area around that time. But I'll never know what exactly she saw out in those woods. I couldn't get out of the woods. From Tex. A few years ago, my friend and I were planning a camping trip. The spot we chose was only about 600 feet away from his house, and we were going to sleep in a bushcraft shelter we had made. As it started getting dark, we were making a fire when I heard a noise from the other side of the slope where we were camped. Thinking it might be a fox that had been sneaking around eating my friend's chickens, I grabbed my rifle and looked through the scope. My heart stopped. Instead of a fox, I saw a large buck. But it wasn't normal. It had no front legs, and not in the way you'd expect. The stumps looked smooth, like it had never had any legs at all. It only had one antler, and its body was oddly shaped, like a combination of a deer and something else. It was hopping on its chest, struggling forward without front legs. I watched for about 5 seconds, completely stunned, until my friend reminded me that there was a house in that direction, and it wasn't safe to shoot. When I looked through the scope again, the creature was gone. I told my friend what I saw, and it took me a minute to convince him I wasn't joking. Once he believed me, we decided it was best to head back to his house for the night. We started packing up all our tools, including the firewood we had gathered. Believe me, I wanted to leave everything behind and come back in the morning, but my friend insisted we pack up, so I didn't argue. It only took us a few minutes. As we were carrying everything back in a bag, we saw it again, right in front of us, about 10 feet away. This time it looked even bigger, like the size of a moose. My friend really believed me then. At first, he had been trying to humor me, but now he saw it too. We knew we were in trouble. Even if we tried to shoot it, it was too large for us to take down, and who knows what it really was. We backed up, trying to go the longer way around to get back to the house, even if it meant taking the highway. We didn't care. We backed away until we could no longer see the creature, and then made a run for the highway. But when we got there, it was too busy to safely walk along. There were only 2 ways back to his house, either the highway or the path where we saw the creature. The only opening in the barbed wire fence along the way was right next to where the thing had been standing. We sat down by the highway, trying to calm ourselves and figure out what to do. After catching our breath, we decided we had no choice but to go back and try the opening in the fence. I remember being scared out of my mind, but we knew we had to go. We started running back, praying that it was gone. Thankfully, it wasn't there anymore. We sprinted the rest of the way back to the house, faster than I think I'd ever run in my life. Once we made it inside, the relief was overwhelming. We never told anyone about that night. We knew no one would believe us. I still don't know what that thing was, but I hope I never see it again. Mimic in the Park, from Pickles1249. This happened on the night of October 27, 2023. I live in Minnesota, and that's only important for trying to narrow down what it was. I was out for a walk last night at around 8 or 9 at night. I was walking by a big park with a baseball diamond across the street with a small thicket of woods around it. I heard a rustling noise in the woods area by the baseball diamond, so I stopped and watched it for a minute or two. I couldn't see anything, but I heard a voice from the woods say, "Hi." It was my girlfriend's voice, My brain told me it was her, but she was at home and I was out alone. I had never experienced fear paralysis before, but I couldn't move. I started hearing more rustling from the woods and I snapped out of it. I wanted to run, but I know you're not supposed to run from things like this. I walked as fast as I could and about a block away and began hearing footsteps behind me. Not like shoes on pavement. The only way I can describe it is hoofs on pavement. I turned to look behind me, and I saw a tall black figure looking at me from behind a van. I turned around and kept walking as fast as I could. Whatever it was followed me all the way home. I'm really into the paranormal and I know a lot about cryptids, but I have no idea what this thing was. I don't think it was a skinwalker because it wasn't pale, and I don't think it was a wendigo because it didn't have antlers. Does anyone have any ideas? Creature on the Tree Line, from Anonymous. Just before I graduated, I was at a high school football game. I'm part of the group that takes pictures for the yearbook, so I was moving around the field, getting shots from different angles. It was late in the evening, and the stadium lights were on, making everything feel kind of surreal. I was walking near the end zone on the right side of the field when I got this sudden feeling, like the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up, that someone was watching me. I tried to brush it off. There were a lot of people around. It was probably nothing. But then I heard something that made me stop. It was a few notes, like a piano playing somewhere nearby. It was soft, almost soothing, but it felt strange, like it was coming from the woods behind the field. My legs started moving toward it, even though my head was telling me not to. It was like I couldn't help it. I ended up at the chain link fence that bordered the woods, staring into the trees, trying to figure out where the music was coming from. That's when I heard it. My name. Someone called my name. It was my brother's voice, and it sounded like it came from the woods. But I knew my brother wasn't there. He wasn't even at the game. I felt my heart start to race. The music stopped, and everything got really quiet. I kept looking into the woods, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure just standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and thin, and it looked like it was trying to stay low, almost crawling. Its skin was pale, and I could barely make it out in the darkness, but I could see enough. It started to move toward me, slow and deliberate. I could see its mouth twist into a grin, and its teeth were sharp, jagged, like they didn't belong. My chest tightened with fear, and I knew I had to get out of there. I backed up, slowly at first, and then I turned and ran. I heard it make a sound, a scream or a howl. It was this horrible mix of a man screaming and an animal howling, and it made me run faster. I didn't stop until I reached the bleachers. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. I found one of my friends and tried to explain what I had just seen. I was rambling, but they just looked at me confused. They hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anything. After I got home, I wanted to understand what had happened. I pulled up Google Maps to see if there were any houses or anything back there, something that could explain it. But there was nothing, just woods for miles. No houses, no trails, nothing that made sense. I still don't know what I saw. I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I was tired, but it felt real, too real. I haven't gone back to that part of the field since, and I'm not sure I want to. Whatever it was, it felt like it was trying to get me alone, like it was calling to me. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. All I know is I don't want to find out. That night is burned into my memory. The music, my brother's voice, that pale figure with those terrible teeth. I don't know what it wanted, but I know I'm not going back to find out. Was that a Wendigo? From Aladu. This is a story that a friend of mine told me, and while I don't have every detail, it's the creepiest thing he's ever experienced, and probably the creepiest thing I've ever heard. It happened in Missouri, back in 2017. He was out hunting with his grandfather in the woods around 9 p.m. It was dark, but they were hoping to catch sight of a deer before they got too tired. They had been walking for a while when he caught a whiff of something awful. He said it was like skunk spray, but way worse, something rotten and unnatural. It was so bad that he decided to follow it, trying to figure out what was causing it. The smell grew stronger and more intense until it was almost unbearable. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished. He and his grandfather looked at each other, confused. That's when they noticed something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, not even the distant hoot of an owl. Everything was still. He knew enough about the woods to know that total silence usually means a predator is nearby. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. As they stood there, trying to figure out what was happening, my friend caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye, something big moving quickly between the trees. He told his grandfather, but his grandfather didn't seem convinced. He thought maybe my friend was just imagining things. But my friend knew what he saw. They kept walking, a bit more cautiously now, when they both saw it again. This time his grandfather couldn't deny it. My friend said he saw the look on his grandfather's face, a look of genuine fear. His grandfather tried to play it off, telling him it was just an overgrown deer, but my friend could tell he didn't believe that himself. They were deep in the woods, close to the center, when they heard it, a horrible screech that echoed through the trees. He said it sounded like a mix between an elk's bugle and a woman's scream, a sound so chilling that it froze him in place. Then he saw it clearly, a large, pale creature with antlers on its head. It had patches of fur, but most of its body was bare, just skin. Its eyes were a glowing reddish orange, and they locked onto his for a moment before it bolted away, moving faster than anything he had ever seen. That was enough for him. He turned and started running back, his grandfather struggling to keep up. They didn't stop until they were out of the woods and back home. They never talked much about what they saw, but my friend knew his grandfather was just as scared as he was. He said his grandfather finally admitted that it wasn't just an overgrown deer. It was something else, something they shouldn't have seen. He mentioned the word Wendigo, but they both knew better than to go back out there at night after that. A few weeks later, my friend saw it again. He was at home, and he caught sight of something in the bushes near his house. It was the same pale creature, watching him. It made eye contact, then turned and ran off into the woods, glancing back at him before disappearing into the trees. He said he'll never forget those eyes, how they seemed to glow even in the shadows. Since then, he hasn't ventured into the woods at night. Whatever that thing was, it was enough to scare both him and his grandfather away for good. He still doesn't know exactly what they saw, but he's certain it was real, and he hopes he never sees it again. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.